Nittany Lions 2025. I think, at least in my opinion, this is probably the best season, the best opportunity that they're going to have to win a national championship. And, they're coming off a national semifinal run, beating Boise State and SMU. And right now, it just seems like they have all the pieces to really put this together. You have Singleton and Allen both coming back for their senior years. You have Drew Allar, who I think has a lot of the pieces necessary to really take that next step to fight, despite the debacle of the Notre Dame game. And, at least defensively too, they just have so many great pass rushers, and also just the addition of Jim Knowles is really going to be an exciting addition to. Nothing against Tom Allen, but I think Jim Knowles is going to add another layer of creativity and excitement to a program that I think desperately needs it too, especially considering, we all know about their Ohio State, Michigan record. I even put it in the comments or in the ticker because it devastates me to say, but 4-17 against them in his tenure so far. So, Preston, with that said, James Franklin in his 12th year, what are your thoughts on Penn State going into 2025 and, their ambitions to hopefully bring a national championship to Happy Valley this fall?
I'm not as high on their national championship aspirations. I know a lot of Penn State fans are like, oh, we're doing what Ohio State did last year. Well, yes and no. Ohio State, they brought back everyone. And then they also had Jeremiah Smith incoming, who took over that wide receiver room with Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate. This year, you're bringing back some guys, but to me, it would be more like Ohio State if you were able to keep Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren along with everyone else that you brought back. So I'm not as high on them. I still think it's awesome, but the big reason I'm not as high on them is just because I don't trust Drew Allar. I don't trust Drew Allar. Yes, he has all the physical tools and talent to be great, but a lot of quarterbacking is, between the ears. Can you make the right decision with the football when you absolutely need to? And I think we've seen in all the big games he's played, he really struggles with that. We saw it in the Notre Dame game. Penn State had an opportunity to drive down and win that game, and Drew Allar threw maybe the worst interception of his career in that moment. And like you said, that game's over. It gets returned for a big run. That game's over. And they lose to Notre Dame, and they probably blow their best chance at a national title that they've had in a long time, because their path to the semifinal was SMU and Boise State. Not really a murderer's row. It's crazy, James Franklin, he got to the semifinals last year, but you could argue he still didn't win a big game last year. You could make that argument. So I just don't trust Drew Allar. I'm going to need to see it to finally believe it. I understand he's been hyped for so long. He was so hyped coming into Penn State. And he's a good quarterback, but I need to see him put it all together before I can really take Penn State seriously as a true national title contender. I think they're a Big Ten contender. I think they can potentially win the Big Ten if they rely on their ground game with 4 returning starters on the offensive line. They only don't return their right guard. Plus, they rotated a lot of guys last year. And obviously, as you said, returning Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen in the backfield, that's huge. But the other thing is, yes, I'm not a fan of Drew Allar, but they really need some receivers to step up. Because Penn State, they've kind of had a run of wide receivers recently. You go back to Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, KJ Hamler, Jahan Dotson, Deshaun Hamilton, those type of guys that were studs on the outside that you could throw it up and they would make a play for you. They didn't have that last year. Tyler Warren was their pass offense last year. He was their go-to guy. And obviously he was a first-round draft pick. That's not a bad option to have. But now you don't have him this year. So how are you going to replace all that production? I think you're going to have to rely heavily on the ground game. You know, I know we kind of talked about it off stream. Andy Kotelnicki, their offensive coordinator, he has a tendency to get cute. I think a lot of offensive coordinators do. You just need, like, sometimes you just need to know your strength and just ride it until they prove they can stop it. And with your offensive line that's returning and your two amazing running backs, that's going to be the strength of your team this year, is your run game and just bludgeoning people and just wearing them down, especially in the fourth quarter. That's how I think they're going to have to win a lot of their football games. And then in the bigger games against Oregon, against Ohio State, you're going to need your wide receivers to make plays, and you're going to need Drew Allar to make good decisions. And I don't know. They're going to have to prove that they can do that.
Yeah, because, as somebody who's been covering Penn State for a long time, I grew up only a couple hours away from University Park. It's a love-hate relationship because a lot of the times, such as when they play Ohio State and Michigan, you have to have a short-term memory to some degree. But I think, and I know I've said it on the show before, you can go back and watch some of my Penn State stuff. I feel like I say it every year that Penn State is on the precipice of finally getting there. But to me, this just feels different. And I get the hesitation about Drew Allar. However, I would like to point out that I think as it stands right now, he could have went to the NFL draft no problem and bid a second day pick right there. So I think it's a testament to what he wants to do right now. And yeah, it's a testament.
I get what you're saying, but the NFL values tools and they don't necessarily value good quarterbacks. Like, they value tools. So yeah, he could have been a second day pick, but I don't know if that would have necessarily been a good draft pick because I'm not a huge fan of Drew Allar. But that's just my opinion. So
yeah, because I think I guess for me, I'm just looking at it a little bit differently because I don't think we necessarily need to see Drew Allar throw for 3,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. And, I think it's more of, hey, can they really kind of build off the foundation that they have? You brought up Kotelnicki a couple seconds ago, who, by the way, I am a fan of him. I love what he did in Kansas. All those things are great. But I think if you go back and watch that Boise State game, for example, I think there were way too many times where Penn State was trying to go for these 60, 70-yard deep bomb passes when in reality, Drew Allar's real strength is being able to really be precise on those short reads, medium throws, and, being able to use his feet when necessary and not being afraid to rely on Allen and Singleton and all that stuff. And yes, I am concerned about not having as much productivity in the wide receiver and the tight end room because what a lot of people don't mention too is Tyler Warren is also a vital part in the rushing attack too. There are a ton of examples you can look at and say, hey, on those third and ones, fourth and one situations, they would just run Tyler Warren straight in that pistol and just snap it to him, and boom, they get the first down. So it goes without saying that, at the end of the day, yes, there's always going to be a hesitation with any Coach Franklin team because I'll sit here and say right now, I think if any program in the country is under the most pressure to win right now, it's probably Penn State. I'll say that right now.
You think so?
I think so because to me this is probably going to be the most hyped Penn State team that I've seen probably since back in the late 90s when they had LeVar Arrington and Courtney Brown, running that defense there. Because even I can't think of another team that's had this much hype. I'm talking, a lot of preseason rankings have them in the top 5. Even when you go back to the golden era of Joe Paterno, that they weren't getting ranked like that at all. So to have this much productivity coming back, you're still going to have one of the best defenses in the entire country. To me, it's a very similar narrative every year. How are they going to look when they have to travel to Ohio State this year? And and most importantly, are they winning the games that they should be winning? Because they're also going to be hosting Oregon on September 27th. And outside of that, a lot of these Big Ten teams, they're better than. UCLA, they have to go on the road versus UCLA and on the road versus Rutgers. That's just not games that Penn State are
at Iowa. Don't forget at Iowa. That's kind of a house of horrors for them recently at Kinnick Stadium.
Yeah,
but you're right. Like they're more talented than all those teams.
Yeah, and the only other Drew Allar stat I'll bring up before I let you say this too, is over the last 2 seasons, the team has been 18-0 when they've completed more than 60% of their completion rate. So I think it just goes to show that it's more about, at least for me, in my eyes, as I'm looking at this team, it's more about how Drew Allar can be efficient, not necessarily him just being this over-the-top quarterback that I think we all want to see more just because teams are just scoring more.
But I'm going to counter that and say, yeah, that's great. But if you look at him last year, he was really good in the regular season, but he completed, I think, over 70% of his passes in the 12-game regular season. But that completion percentage dropped, I think, at least 5 points in the playoff games. So to me, that says that, yeah, he can play great against Rutgers or Northwestern or a lot of the bottom feeder Big Ten teams. But when he really needs to play well against those top teams that they are going to need to beat to get where they think they need to go and where they should be going, Morgan, stop. Sorry about that. He needs to play better, and he struggles against those better teams. So that would be my argument against that.
Yeah, because I mean, I guess when I look at this team, I just curious about, how much are they really going to make Drew Allar throw the football? I'm not saying that they're going to just run the ball every play with Singleton and Allen, because I don't think they need to do that. But you brought it up a couple seconds ago with this wide receiver room. There hasn't been a wide receiver that I've seen in the past couple seasons where I've watched him on tape and said to myself, okay, this kid's going to be a difference maker. This kid is someone that we can rely on in the red zone when you have those one-on-one type of situations. And I definitely think it is something to be concerned about, and something that teams like Ohio State and like their Michigans of the world are gonna hone in on and hopefully exploit.
If you watch them, like you said, if you watch Penn State the last few years, their receivers can't even get separation off the line of scrimmage. Like they are blanketed from jump. And if I'm a defensive coordinator going up against Penn State, I'm going to load the box on first and second down. I'm going to stop the run first of all, and then on third and long, I'm playing straight up press coverage, and I'm going to say, hey, your receivers need to beat me. They need to prove that they can beat me in one-on-one situations, because I don't think they can. And I really think that's going to be a huge problem this year for them. They need receivers to step up. I know they brought in Kyron Hudson from USC. I think they're really excited about him. He's a bigger body. They're going to use him as a contested catch guy. But can you go win those 50-50 balls on third and long, on third and medium? Because against those better teams, they're going to shut down your run game. Like, you're not going to be able to just run the ball at will against Ohio State or Oregon or, like a Georgia if you make the playoff. You're not going to be able to do that. You're going to need receivers to make plays one-on-one. And they've really lacked that the last few years.
Yeah, because the last thing I'll mention about their passing attack too is, Singleton had about 300-something, I think 370-something receiving yards last year. So I think there is something.
He was second on the team in receiving, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. So I know Kawanicky definitely wants to utilize him more, and I get that, and I get he didn't have as many carries down last year because Singleton was a little banged up or whatever. So I think that's another thing to keep my eye on as I watch him in these first couple kind of laugher games when they play the Nevadas, the Florida Nationals, and Villanovas. Is, I guess, one, how much of this playbook do they really open up? And two, how much are they going to use Singleton as the explosive rusher that I love to watch versus how much are they going to have to rely on him to be, used out in the slot, for example, or, maybe having to run some screenplays where you're expecting him to maybe be shifty and break some tackles. And I think that's something to kind of keep your eye on if you're a Penn State fan as well.
I know you kind of talked about it a little bit. You talked about how they brought in Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator from Ohio State. And I know Penn State fans are really excited about that. I mean, yeah, he might be an upgrade over Tom Allen, but I don't think it's really that significant because for the longest time, they've kind of run through defensive coordinators. You go back to Brett Pry, who's now the head coach at Virginia Tech. Then they get Manny Diaz, and they get Tom Allen. Now they have Jim Knowles. Defense hasn't been their issue. They're always really good on defense. So I understand it because you're getting them from Ohio State, so you're thinking you're going to weaken Ohio State. But I don't think defense was their issue. So I think their issue has always been their offense in these big games. And that's where Andy Kotelnicki needs to be better.
Yeah, because I mean, you even said it too. I'm in agreement too. I don't think, at least schematically speaking, that there's going to be much of a difference between the defense that you've seen with Tom Allen and Manny Diaz versus Jim Knowles. I think if you ask me, Jim Knowles is the type of guy that likes to run a hybrid defense, which to me probably looks like more of it could look like a 3-3-5, or you could just call it a base defense. Whereas Tom Allen necessarily didn't do that as much. And I think Jim Knowles is also looking for being able to disguise some blitzes and being able to really utilize these pass rushers in a way that I don't think we might have seen as much with Tom Allen. But I think at the same time too, you brought it up too. I mean, they're returning so many guys this year, particularly on the defensive line and in the secondary. I know at least one transfer for me that I'm really excited about is Amir Campbell, who was a freshman at North Carolina last year. He had 76 tackles, 6.5 sacks, 11 tackles for loss. So when you just keep bringing in guys like that, there's just definitely a lot to be excited for. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's really the reason why, Penn State carries themselves into a national championship, contention and whatnot too.
You brought up the defensive line. I've gotten into arguments with Penn State fans online this year because I've said, because they've tried to argue with me that there's not going to be a huge drop off from Abdul Carter to their next guy up, who's Denied Dennis Sutton. And I'm like, dog, Abdul Carter was a first-team All-American last year. He was a top 5 NFL draft pick. Denied Dennis Sutton was a second-team All-Big Ten selection. There's a massive drop-off, especially when you don't have Carter taking up all of the offense's attention. And now you're going to be the guy. So I think Denied Dennis Sutton is going to have a huge step up this year. I know they also brought in Max Granville, who they're really excited about on the edge as well. And then the one guy that I'm really, really excited about on the defense is A.J. Harris.
Yeah.
He might be the best corner in the country. I'm not joking about that. A.J. Harris
is the real deal. He's the real deal.
He is absolutely the real deal. Obviously they lose their safeties. Kevin Winston Jr., he goes to the NFL, but he was hurt last year, so they kind of had their depth guys stepped in. So now they're going to be ready to step up this year.
There's a reason why. And there's a reason why at Penn State that none of these guys transfer out. You can look at even Penn State's running back room, for example. They have 5 freshmen. None of those kids decided to transfer, even though that they're going to sit behind Singleton and Allen. It's the same way on that defensive front too. Yeah, there's not going to be names that you're going to see on ESPN or whatever, but there are going to be some kids that you're going to talk about a year or two later and say, hey, he sat, he waited his time, he got developed the right way, and it's going to show.
And James Franklin, the one thing he does exceptionally well is recruit. They've always recruited really well. And especially in the secondary this year, they have a lot of depth. They have a lot of quality depth that's not necessarily starters, but they've played a lot of snaps. I think James Franklin does a really good job of getting those guys reps in game and developing them. Like, I know they lose Jalen Reed and Kevin Winston Jr., but then you also return Zachy Wheatley, who's going to be the leader in that safety room, and he's a fifth-year guy, I'm pretty sure. They're gonna rely on him to be a leader in the secondary, along with AJ Harris. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I guess the question for me, and we kind of talked about it off air. Last year, it felt like that was the year they were going to beat Ohio State because they beat them in 2016. They won the Big Ten championship that year. They haven't beat them since. And, you block the field goal and they get that huge win in Beaver Stadium. But they haven't beat them since. They play every year. And that is the biggest game of the year for them. It felt like last year was, if they were going to get them, it was going to be last year, but they didn't. They get that pick six. They have all that momentum early. Then the offense doesn't score a touchdown. The defense outscored the offense in that game, and they lose to Ohio State at home. When are you going to beat Ohio State? Because you have to go to Columbus this year. Like, when are you going to beat them?
I mean, Ohio State also has a freshman starting quarterback, too. I mean, they have Julian Sayin.
But Julian Sayin's a stud. Julian Sayin is a stud, and
I mean, I'd rather go into the game with Drew Allar than Julian Sayin.
I mean, I'm not Drew Allar, but I get what you're saying. But I mean, then you also have Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. Yeah. Not Emeka Egbuka, he's gone. But you have Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate.
Exactly.
Ohio State, they always recruit really well too. But again, like, Columbus is a really tough place to play. Like, you think you can go in there and beat them? That's going to be a game that Drew Allar has to step up and prove me wrong.
And exactly what you said too, that kind of signature James Franklin win that all of us are looking for. And that goes back to my original point, is that's why I just think, if you ask me who's under the most pressure to win this year, it's Penn State. At least in terms of who needs to win a national title right now, it's James Franklin. Just given how much returning production that they have. He's been there 12 seasons. Everybody loves the guy, but if you talk with people in University Park, that's the conversation those are the debates we're all having, is whether or not they will win a national title under James Franklin.
It sounds like you think that they have a 2-game season this year. The home game against Oregon and then at Ohio State.
I mean, I am a little bit concerned about the Iowa and Nebraska game. I'll say that too. But I mean, for the most part, when I look at the schedule, I'm definitely more optimistic than pessimistic. So,
but like, what happens? So, like, with all these expectations that are being thrown on this program, what happens if Oregon and Ohio State both beat them and they go 10-2 again? What to you? Like, what does that say?
Hey, I don't have my crystal ball, but I guess it depends on how it kind of happens. If they just completely shit the bed, then I would probably say, hey, I think there really does need to be a serious conversation of, hey, are we just okay with Penn State just being a 10-11 win season and never winning a national championship? Or do we need to just put some more pressure on Franklin and put some more resources and give it another run? That's where it's kind of the hard balance to find, because my gut still tells me that James Franklin will win a national championship. It's just every year I say this over and over and over again, and I feel like a broken record. And then I just know I'm setting myself up for something that will never happen. But when I look at this team this year, it just feels so much different than 2024. And I just hope that, somebody like they take care of Oregon and hopefully like a team like UCLA, they don't lose to, or something crazy like that. Cause I think it would just be a total disaster if they lost to a team like UCLA or Northwestern.
They are pretty good. I will say this about Penn State and James Franklin. They're pretty good about beating the teams they're supposed to beat. They just can't beat the teams that have more talent and are better than them. And if you want to win a national championship, eventually you're going to have to get over that hump. I do have another question for you, just because I just thought of this. Obviously, with the 14 playoff, Penn State was the team that everyone said, oh, they would benefit the most from expanding this because they're always right there. You know, like Penn State, I think if you go back, they would have been in basically every single, playoff if we had a 12-team playoff going back to, the 14 playoff when it started. They would have been in it most years.
Right.
Are playoff appearances, because the field is expanded to 12 now, are playoff appearances and not doing anything with them, is that eventually going to get old? Like, are people going to eventually get sick of that? Like, oh, that's what you're supposed to do, but you're not going above and beyond that. Do you kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's yes and no, because I think James Franklin is so beloved at Penn State that I just can't imagine them firing him over something like that. But at the same time, that might have to be what the conversation actually ends up being, because I think if it's up to James Franklin, I think he would have a job there the rest of his life. Yeah. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I think Penn State is just that type of institution where they're not just going to they're not going to let people get in their ear and put pressure on them like that. So it's one of those things where, yes, I think we all want to see James Franklin win a national championship, but I think over time, I think people would let it go depending on what the circumstance is. And maybe if James Franklin never wins a national championship, maybe he has to go to another school and do it there instead.
I mean, he grew up in Pennsylvania. He's from there. I know that is his dream job. But last year when they lost to Ohio State, I don't know if you remember this, he fans were yelling at him and he chirped back at them. He started yelling at them. And you just can't do that, because that shows you're letting the pressure get to you. You can't do that. So I think you're right. This is a big year for Penn State. I feel like I understand the expectations, but I don't think they're going to win the national championship this year.